Hi, I am making this short video in order to help you with your Obama-Romney convention speech assignment. What I ask you to do is what my students are very often do in the social scientists, but it's also something that people in the humanities do. It is called an argumentative paper, and it's actually very simple if you follow a couple of simple rules that I'm going to outline below. Um, I'd also like to note that rules for such an essay may be different in different cultures or in different languages. For example, I know for a fact that what you are required to do for an essay in France is actually the direct opposite you're going to be asked to do in an Anglo-Saxon country. So here we are going to review what you should do when you're writing in English. Although I find that this actually works in Hungarian too. So to begin with, I would like you to read your task carefully and make sure that you exactly do what you're supposed to do. It's easy to get carried away while you're doing your assignment, so before you hand it in, it is worth reading it through again and see that you actually answer the question that I posed. The structure of such papers is very simple. It has three parts: an introduction and body, in which you present your evidence and argument, and a conclusion. The introduction is usually short, and because you're only asked to write 800 words, I suggest that it should not be longer than 2 sentences. In the introduction, basically you state what you're arguing for. I'm bringing you examples. These are from past assignments for my students, a little bit different at what you're doing now. But you can get the gist of what you should do. So the first example is, in this paper I'm going to argue against Mandelbaum's claim that the US has intervened abroad selflessly and that it creates financial and political stability in the world. The other one, this paper assesses the magnitude of the terrorist threat in Slovakia and argues that the terrorist attack is unlikely in the near future. In order to prove my point, I am going to review three factors: the geographic location, power, and population of the country. This last sentence is not compulsory, but it's actually, if you add this, it's actually easier to follow what you're doing. In terms of your Obama-Romney assignment, you can say, I'm going to argue that Romney is a libertarian. You can also say that Obama displays examples for various different ideologies. So your argument doesn't necessarily have to be either or. It can be a mixture of something. So you can take the middle road approach, which is usually what I take, but it doesn't mean you have to. The conclusion is again very easy to do. It's sort of like the mirror image of the introduction. Again, very short, 1 or 2 sentences, and in this you repeat what you argued for and sum up your argument. An example is, this paper assessed the magnitude of the terrorist threat in Slovakia and argued that the terrorist attack is unlikely in the near future. I brought three arguments to support my position: the importance of the geographic location of Slovakia, power held by Slovakia, and the size of the population of Slovakia. Now, most of this video is going to tell you how to write a good body, how to write a good argument, how to support your claim. So basically, most of your paper is going to be made up of points that will prove what you told me in the introduction. In general, I will ask you to have about 3 points or 3 paragraphs that supports your claim in the introduction. Paragraphs, I usually encourage my students to think of paragraphs in the sense that they are maybe 5, 7 sentences long. It doesn't mean that they cannot be 4 sentences long and perfect, but that's where you should where you should be going. So it should be around 5-7 sentences long. um, what you're doing, you're essentially in every paragraph, you have a claim for that paragraph that relates to the big claim you made in the introduction. And this claim says, what is your point? What do you want to prove in this paragraph? And you continue the paragraph with giving evidence or proof for the claim that you made. There are a lot of things that can be considered as evidence. You can use a historical event. Describe something that happened in history, but describe with a specific view on how this actually supports your point. So it's not usually a general description of the French Revolution, but it's specifically directed to how poverty led to the revolution itself. You can use statistical data. You can essentially use a logical argument as well. And you can use quotes or you can paraphrase people. You can paraphrase other scholars if you think that argument backs up your claim. Or in this case, you're going to use claims made by Obama or Romney. So in the following, I will give you a couple of examples what a good argument is like. So for example, you can use data as proof in the following way. You claim that the United States is currently the largest oil consumer country in the world, and then you use proof or evidence, which should be something along the lines that the US imports X gallons of oil per year, which is X times as much as the size of the oil import of China, which is the second largest oil importing country. And of course, if you use data, you always have to add the source where you got that information from. Second one is essentially either a historical argument or a logical argument or something in between these two. So the claim is that Mandelbaum claims that American hegemony increases the political military security. The current situation in Iraq proves otherwise. This is essentially your claim sentence. The Mandelbaum sentence at the beginning only just introduces the reader to where we actually are. And your proof is, after American invasion, Iraq is in a political vacuum. US occupation forces still fight insurgents, the Iraqi government is weak, and its existence is only due to US presence. If America leaves, there is a high likelihood that the power vacuum in the region will give grant to a large war between power-hungry Iran, the Kurds, who desire an independent state for long, and blah 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 blah. It's actually the last sentence is not finished because this could be a really long argument. Now, let's consider shortly what is not an argument and what I will not want to see in your paper. Descriptions. If you just give me a description, for example, if you describe the U.S. security architecture or basically the institutions that are part of making U.S. national security, that doesn't prove that the U.S. takes care of world security. In another way, if you give examples why the US is a global hegemon, it's not going to be a counter-argument to saying that the US is a global hegemon. I know this sounds funny, but these usually are real-life examples. And there are a couple of things that you should not do when writing a paper. That's what I claim never, never, never do. Never use questions in an academic paper. When you feel like using questions, most of the time you can actually turn this question into a positive statement. An example is that if you want to say, the post-war reconstruction in Iraq is a lucrative business, and guess who got the best deals? US companies. Yeah, so don't use questions, and also because this is an additional meaning the way I read it, so you should actually get that additional emotional something out of your work as well. But I'll talk about it a little later. So write instead, The post-war reconstruction in Iraq is a lucrative business, and most reconstruction contracts were offered to American companies. It exactly means the same thing, but it sounds a lot more academic. Never use exclamation marks or question marks. Never use hyperbole or emotional statements. Um, Basically, the idea is that you get your outreach out of your system before you start the assignment. You might not agree with what Obama is saying. You might not agree with what Romney is saying. It doesn't matter. What I want to say is a logical academic argument, which you usually lose if you start getting emotional. Again, of course, sometimes we express emotions and sometimes we have to use adjectives, but what I try to suggest is that you try to avoid expressing strong adjectives and using um, slangish kind of adjectives. So don't tell me colossal, huge, or bombastic. Tell me that something is very large or big. Please never state the obvious. If you watched House MD, or what we know in the region as Dr. House, he would tell you that triteness kicks us in the net. In other words, stating the obvious is boring and will not further your argument. One such obvious statement is the world is complex. Of course it is. Never use three dots at the end of a sentence. Finish your thought instead. Never use abbreviations without giving a clue what they mean. When you read the examples below, nobody knows what the heck a bumfuck speech is. But if you see how the second version was done, when essentially you first give the full meaning, put the abbreviation in parentheses and keep using it in the rest of the text, then we actually understand what the heck this bumfuck is. It's actually nothing else than he used a couple of expressions a bit too often, which was brotherhood of man and fatherhood of God, and it was kind of funny. Again, never use slang or colloquial expressions, or try to avoid them. I know it's not too easy if this is the first time you have to write an academic paper in English. And never make comments for me in the paper. It's actually a real life example from a student in the past who said, Bush became president in 2001. Sorry, I'm not sure I remember this date correctly, and was re-elected in 2004. So the good way of doing this is simply you look up the data. And if you want to tell me something, then you just write me an email. And also never be too general when you argue. That's just not a good argument. The good is not a benevolent hegemon. Hegemons tend to be bad, so the US is bad. That's something politicians do. Also, another thing that I see happening a lot of the times is students overuse I. Don't do that. When you're trying to say things, I believe, I guess, I think, at least as far as I know, I might be wrong, but that usually should be read as a warning sign that you have a claim, but you don't yet have an argument. So the best thing to do is that to take out the I believe or I think part and just keep the statement and use some evidence to support it. Again, when you're using other sources, there is the temptation of use quote very long parts. It's possible, but don't do it too often. It's another way of using these quotes is that you rephrase them, but you still, of course, add references. And one last thing, never drop names. It will not strengthen your argument that somebody that we keep in high regard said something. Just think about it. Great people we respect could be wrong, and you might actually be able to come up with a better argument than they do. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please email me. Good luck.